You're lying in bed. The room is quiet, the lights are off, and you're finally starting to drift. Your breathing has slowed, your muscles are releasing, and then, without warning, it arrives. That moment. The one from 3 years ago, or maybe 7. The one where you said the wrong thing, or laughed too loud, or misread the room completely. And suddenly, you're not in your bed anymore. You're back there, reliving it in excruciating detail. Your face gets hot, even though you're alone in the dark. Your stomach drops. You might even make a sound, a small groan or a sharp inhale, anything to interrupt the replay happening inside your mind. Why does your brain do this? Why does it choose now when you're trying to rest to remind you of that moment you'd give anything to forget? If this has ever happened to you, and it probably has, you already know the strange, specific torture of replaying embarrassing moments at night. You're not broken. You're not alone. You're human. And tonight, we're going to understand why. Let's start with what it actually feels like. Because if you've experienced this, you know it's not just a thought. It's a full-body event. You're lying there, maybe scrolling through your phone, maybe staring at the ceiling, maybe already halfway to sleep. And then the memory just appears. You didn't invite it. You didn't go looking for it. It simply shows up, uninvited and unwelcome, like someone walking into your room without knocking. And the moment it arrives, everything changes. Your body reacts first. There's that sudden flush of heat that spreads across your face and neck. Your heart rate picks up, just slightly, just enough to notice. Your stomach might tighten or drop, that awful sinking feeling like you've missed a step on the stairs. You might physically wince, your face scrunching up in the dark. Some people cover their face with their hands even though no one's watching. Others squeeze their eyes shut tighter as if that will make the memory go away. Some make involuntary sounds, a groan, a whispered, "Oh God," a sharp exhale, anything to break the spell, to interrupt the scene playing in your mind. Because that's what it feels like. A scene. A movie you can't pause, except you're not watching it, you're in it, you're experiencing it again. The words you said hang in the air. The expression on the other person's face is frozen in time. The silence that followed, if there was one, feels eternal. And somehow, even though this happened months or years ago, it feels vivid. More vivid, actually, than it probably felt when it first happened. Because now you have distance, now you have perspective, now you can see it from every angle, including all the ways you wish it had gone differently. The types of moments that show up vary, but they share a common thread. Sometimes it's something you said, a joke that didn't land, a comment that came out wrong, a compliment that sounded strange the moment it left your mouth. You can still hear your own voice saying it, and you cringe at the tone, the timing, the choice of words. Sometimes it's something you did, tripping in public, waving at someone who wasn't waving at you, sending a message to the wrong person, walking into the wrong room, misunderstanding a social cue so completely that everyone noticed. Sometimes it's quieter than that. It's the moment you talk too much and saw someone's eyes glaze over. The time you laughed at something that wasn't funny and realized too late. The instance where you thought you were bonding with someone but later realized you were just making them uncomfortable. These moments might seem small to anyone else, might not even register as embarrassing to an outside observer, but to you, they're anything but small. They're proof, your mind tells you, of something fundamentally wrong with the way you exist in the world. And here's what makes it worse. These memories don't just appear once, they loop. You relive the moment, feel the cringe, try to push it away, and then, like a song stuck in your head, it comes back. Sometimes within seconds, sometimes it leaves for a few minutes and returns when you least expect it. You might find yourself physically shaking your head, as if you can physically dislodge the thought. You might say something out loud to yourself, "Stop it," or "Why am I like this?" or just a frustrated sound that has no words. The compulsion to interrupt the memory is almost irresistible, because replaying it feels unbearable. It's not like remembering a normal event, it's re-experiencing the emotional core of it. The embarrassment is fresh. The shame, if that's what it is, feels present tense, so your mind and body try to escape. You shift positions in bed, you grab your phone, you focus very hard on something else, anything else, but the memory is patient. It waits, and often it comes back. What's strange is how selective these replays are. You don't usually replay your proudest moments at night. You don't lie in bed reliving the time someone complimented you, or the day you did something well, or the conversation where you felt truly seen and appreciated. Those memories exist somewhere, but they don't have the same magnetic pull. They don't demand attention the way embarrassing moments do. They don't wake you up with their insistence. They don't make your body react. The embarrassing ones, though, they arrive with force, and they're detailed. You remember what you were wearing, the lighting in the room, the exact words that were said, or at least your mind's version of them. You remember who was there, how they looked at you, what you felt in that precise instant. It's like your brain took a high-definition photograph of the moment and stored it in a special file labelled "Never forget this, it's important." But why? Why would your brain decide that these moments, of all the thousands of moments you've lived, are the ones worth preserving in such vivid detail? Why would it choose to replay them now when you're trying to rest, when you're vulnerable and tired and just want peace? And there's something else too, something you might have noticed but never quite put into words. These memories feel worse at night than they do during the day. If the same memory crosses your mind at 3 PM while you're making coffee or answering emails, you can usually bat it away pretty easily. It stings for a second, maybe, but then you move on. You have things to do. Your mind is occupied. But at night, when the world is quiet and you're alone with your thoughts, when there's nothing to distract you from yourself, these memories take on a different quality. They feel heavier, more serious, more permanent. The darkness itself seems to amplify everything. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling or at the back of your eyelids, you have nowhere to go. You can't escape your own mind. And so the memory just sits there with you, taking up space, demanding to be felt, and you do feel it, over and over again. The same flush of heat, the same sinking stomach, the same desire to disappear. If you've ever wondered why this happens, why your brain seems determined to torment you with moments you'd rather forget, you're not asking the wrong question. You're asking exactly the right one. Because there is a reason. There's psychology here, neuroscience, evolutionary purpose, all tangled up with the very human experience of wanting to belong, wanting to be liked, wanting not to be the person who makes mistakes. And understanding why this happens doesn't make the memories disappear, but it does something else. It makes them make sense. And sometimes, making sense of something is the first step toward making peace with it. So if you're lying here now and a memory has already surfaced, or if you know it will later tonight, that's okay. You don't have to fight it. You don't have to feel ashamed of feeling ashamed. because what you're experiencing is so deeply, universally human that it has a name in psychology. It has patterns, it has explanations, and more than that, it has companionship. You are not the only person replaying embarrassing moments in the dark. You're not even close to being alone in this. We all carry these moments. We all cringe. We all wish, sometimes desperately, that we could go back and do it differently. That's not a flaw in you. That's just what it means to be alive and awake and aware of yourself in the world. There's a reason your brain holds on to embarrassing moments with such tenacity. And it's not because you're broken or overly sensitive or unable to let things go. It's because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's trying to keep you safe. The problem is, the part of your brain responsible for this doesn't always know the difference between a social mistake and a physical threat. To your brain, both matter. Both get filed under important. Remember this. Let's talk about why embarrassing moments stick when so many other memories fade. Think about the last genuinely kind thing someone said to you. Maybe it was last week. Maybe it was yesterday. Someone complimented your work or told you they appreciated you, or said something that made you feel seen. Do you remember it? You might. But here's the question. Can you recall it with the same vivid, visceral detail as that embarrassing moment from 3 years ago? Probably not. The compliment feels good when it happens, and then it sort of dissolves. It doesn't anchor itself in your memory the way the cringeworthy moments do. It doesn't replay at night. It doesn't demand attention. This isn't fair, but it's not random either. Your brain has what psychologists call a negativity bias. It's the tendency to notice, remember, and be affected more strongly by negative experiences than positive ones. The psychologist Rick Hanson describes it beautifully. He says our brains are like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. The bad stuff sticks. The good stuff slides right off. And this isn't because you're pessimistic or because you don't appreciate good things. It's because of evolution. For most of human history, remembering negative experiences was a survival advantage. If you ate a certain berry and got sick, your brain needed to remember that berry in vivid detail so you'd never eat it again. If you wandered into a particular part of the forest and encountered a predator, your brain needed to encode that location, that smell, that feeling of danger so deeply that you'd avoid it forever. Mistakes had consequences. Forgetting them could mean death. So the brain evolved to prioritize negative information, to give us more weight, more staying power, more emotional intensity, and that same mechanism which kept your ancestors alive is still running in your modern brain. Except now, instead of remembering which berries are poisonous, your brain is remembering which social situations felt dangerous. And to your ancient, evolutionarily wired brain, social danger is real danger. Because humans are social creatures. We always have been. For thousands of years, being part of a group wasn't just nice, it was necessary. Isolation meant vulnerability. Rejection from the tribe could mean death. So your brain learned to treat social mistakes as threats. If you did something that might make others think poorly of you, that might lead to exclusion. Your brain needed to remember it, needed to make sure you never did it again, needed to encode it so powerfully that the mere memory of it would make you careful in the future. That's where the amygdala comes in. It's a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, and it's essentially your emotional alarm system. When something happens that carries emotional weight, especially fear, embarrassment, or shame, the amygdala lights up. It tags that experience as important. It tells the rest of your brain, pay attention to this, store this, we need to remember this. And the thing about the amygdala is that it doesn't discriminate between types of threats. A moment of social embarrassment activates similar neural pathways as physical danger. Research has shown that social pain, the kind you feel when you're rejected or humiliated or embarrassed, overlaps significantly with physical pain in the brain. The same areas light up. Your brain doesn't think, oh, this is just awkward, no big deal. It thinks, this is pain, this is a threat. Code red. So when you said that thing that came out wrong, or when you tripped in front of everyone, or when you misread the situation entirely, your amygdala was there, taking notes. It encoded that memory with emotional intensity. It wrapped it in feeling. And because emotions act like a highlighter for memory, that moment became sticky. It became the kind of memory that doesn't fade easily, that resurfaces without permission, that replays with startling clarity. Meanwhile, when someone complimented you last Tuesday, your amygdala barely noticed. There was no threat, no alarm, no urgent need to remember. So that moment got processed differently. It felt good, sure, but it didn't get encoded with the same intensity. It didn't get filed under critical information for survival. It just sort of existed and then drifted away, pleasant but forgettable. This is why you can remember, in high definition, the exact expression on someone's face when you said something awkward 5 years ago, but you can't remember what your best friend complimented you on last month. Your brain isn't being cruel, it's being efficient in its own way. It's allocating memory storage based on what it thinks you need to survive. And according to your ancient wiring, you need to remember threats and mistakes far more than you need to remember praise. But here's where it gets complicated. Because while this system worked well when threats were straightforward, when danger was a predator or a poisonous plant, it doesn't work quite as well in the modern world. Now, the threats your brain is encoding are things like saying you too when a server says enjoy your meal, things like sending a slightly awkward email, things like laughing at the wrong moment. These aren't life or death situations. They're not even close. But your brain doesn't know that. It's still running on ancient software, treating every social misstep like it could lead to exile from the tribe. And so, the protective mechanism becomes overactive. Your brain, in its effort to help you, ends up hurting you. It replays these moments not to torture you, but to teach you, to make sure you never make that mistake again, to keep you vigilant, to keep you safe, but the cost is high. Because the replay itself becomes a source of pain. The memory, meant to protect you, ends up haunting you instead. There's something else worth understanding here. The more emotionally charged a memory is, the more it gets reinforced each time you recall it. This is part of how memory works. Every time you remember something, you're not just passively retrieving a file from storage, you're actively reconstructing it. And in that reconstruction, you can strengthen it. Make it more vivid, more sticky, more permanent. So when you replay that embarrassing moment at night, when you relive the feeling of it, you're actually reinforcing the memory. You're telling your brain, yes, this is still important. Keep this one close. And your brain listens. It holds on tighter. The memory becomes even more entrenched, which means it's more likely to surface again tomorrow night, and the night after that. It's a cycle, one that can feel impossible to break. But understanding this cycle is important, because it helps you see what's actually happening. You're not weak for remembering. You're not broken for replaying. you're experiencing a completely natural, deeply ingrained response to emotionally significant events. Your brain is doing what it was built to do. It's just doing it in a context where the threats aren't real anymore, where the danger is mostly in your head, where the memory itself has become more painful than the original moment ever was. And here's the thing that might offer some comfort. Even if it's small, everyone's brain works this way, not just yours. Everyone has a negativity bias. Everyone has an amygdala that overreacts to social mistakes. Everyone remembers their embarrassing moments in sharper detail than their triumphs. You might feel alone in this, lying in the dark replaying that moment from years ago, but you're not. Across the world, right now, someone else is cringing at their own memory. Someone else is wishing they could forget. Someone else is wondering why their brain won't let them rest. The negativity bias is universal. It's part of being human. And while that doesn't make it pleasant, it does make it normal. You're not uniquely flawed for having a brain that remembers what you wish it would forget. You're just human. And your brain, for all its quirks and misfires, is trying its best to protect you, even when that protection feels more like punishment. So the next time a memory surfaces, the next time you feel that familiar flush of embarrassment, try to remember this. Your brain isn't attacking you. It's trying to help you in the only way it knows how. It's saying, yeah, remember this so you don't do it again. The problem is you already remember. You've remembered 1,000 times, and yet your brain keeps teaching the same lesson over and over because it doesn't know how to stop. It doesn't know that you've learned. It doesn't know that the threat is long gone. That's the gap between your ancient brain and your modern life. Between the wiring you were born with and the world you actually live in. And living in that gap can feel exhausting. But it also means something important. It means that what you're experiencing isn't personal. It's not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of how human brains work. And sometimes knowing that is enough to soften the blow, to make the replay a little less painful, to help you see yourself with a bit more compassion. Because you're not remembering these moments because you're weak. You're remembering them because you're wired to survive. And survival, for better or worse, has always meant learning from pain. But if your brain is always wired this way, if the negativity bias is always running, why do these memories seem to choose nighttime? Why do they wait until you're in bed, in the dark, trying to rest to make their appearance? Because during the day, you might think of an embarrassing moment and brush it off relatively easily. You're busy, you're distracted, you're moving through the world with tasks and conversations and 100 little things demanding your attention. But at night, everything changes. The same memory that barely registered at 3 in the afternoon becomes unbearable at 3 in the morning. And there's a reason for that too. During the day, your mind is occupied. You're focused outward. There's work to do, people to talk to, emails to answer, errands to run. Your attention is scattered across dozens of different things, and that scattering is actually protective. It keeps your mind from lingering too long in any one place. It keeps the deeper, more uncomfortable thoughts at bay. You're too busy to ruminate, too distracted to spiral, and so even if an embarrassing memory surfaces, it doesn't get much traction. It flickers and fades. You move on. But when you lie down at night, all of that external stimulation disappears. The tasks are done. The conversations are over. The world has gone quiet. And suddenly, your mind has nowhere to go but inward. There's nothing left to distract you from yourself. And that's when the memories come flooding in. Not because they weren't there during the day, but because now there's finally space for them. Now your mind has room to wander. And where does it wander? Straight to the things you've been avoiding. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network. It's a network of brain regions that becomes active when you're not focused on the outside world. When you're daydreaming, reflecting, remembering, or just letting your mind drift. And this network is responsible for a lot of self-referential thinking about yourself, about your past, about who you are and how others see you. During the day, when you're engaged with tasks, the default mode network is relatively quiet. But at night, when there's nothing else to focus on, it takes over. And here's the thing about the default mode network. It doesn't just let your mind wander randomly. It has patterns. It tends to pull you toward unresolved emotional material, toward things that still carry a charge, toward memories that haven't been fully processed or put to rest. And embarrassing moments, with all their emotional intensity, are exactly the kind of thing this network gravitates toward. So when you lie in bed and your mind starts to drift, it's not drifting toward neutral territory. It's drifting toward the stuff that still stings. This is why nighttime feels different. It's not just that you're tired. It's that the structure of your mental activity has fundamentally shifted. You've moved from an outward focus to an inward one, from task-oriented thinking to self-reflective thinking. And in that shift, all the things you managed to keep at arm's length during the day suddenly move front and centre. There's also something happening with your body's natural rhythms that makes nighttime more difficult. Your cortisol levels, the hormone associated with stress, follow a daily pattern. They're highest in the morning, which helps you wake up and feel alert, and they gradually decline throughout the day. By evening, your cortisol is lower, which is part of why you start to feel tired. But here's where it gets interesting. For some people, cortisol doesn't drop smoothly. It can spike again in the late evening, creating what some researchers call evening anxiety. And when cortisol rises, even slightly, it can amplify negative emotions. It can make worries feel more urgent. It can make embarrassing memories feel more shameful. So you're lying there, your cortisol potentially ticking upward, your default mode network active and pulling you toward emotional material, and you're tired. And fatigue matters more than you might think. Because emotional regulation, the ability to manage and modulate your emotions, requires mental energy. It's a resource that gets depleted throughout the day. Every time you bite your tongue instead of snapping at someone, every time you stay patient when you're frustrated, every time you push through a difficult task, you're using up a little bit of your emotional regulation capacity. By the time you get into bed, that capacity is running low. You're mentally and emotionally exhausted. And so your ability to manage intrusive thoughts, to redirect your attention, to calm yourself down when a memory surfaces, all of that is diminished. You don't have the same mental resources you had in the morning. You're running on empty, and that's why the same memory that you could wave away at noon becomes overwhelming at midnight. It's not that the memory has changed, it's that you have less ability to cope with it. There's also something about darkness itself that changes how we experience our own thoughts. Darkness and solitude have always had a relationship with introspection, sometimes productive, sometimes painful. When you can't see the world around you, when you're lying in a dark room with nothing to look at but the inside of your eyelids, your awareness turns completely inward. And that inward focus can feel like being trapped with your thoughts, trapped with your memories, trapped with all the things you'd rather not think about. During the day, even if you're alone, there's visual stimulation, there's light, there are things to see, to notice, to anchor your attention to the external world. But in the dark, those anchors disappear. You're left floating in your own mind. And for some people that feels less like peace and more like being locked in a room with your worst thoughts. The darkness doesn't just remove distractions, it removes escape routes. And then there's the bed itself, the place where you're supposed to rest, the place where you're supposed to feel safe and comfortable. But when intrusive thoughts arrive, the bed becomes something else. It becomes the place where you can't get away. You can't go for a walk. You can't call a friend. You can't throw yourself into a project. You're supposed to be sleeping, which means you're supposed to be still, supposed to be quiet, supposed to let go. But how do you let go when your mind is gripping so tightly to a memory? There's a particular kind of frustration that comes with this. You know you should be sleeping. You know that lying here replaying embarrassing moments isn't helping anything. You know that tomorrow you'll be tired and you'll regret staying awake with these thoughts. But knowing that doesn't make it stop, because the thoughts aren't logical. They're not something you can reason your way out of. They're emotional, they're visceral, and they don't care that it's 2 a.m. and you have to wake up in 5 hours. This is part of what makes nighttime rumination so exhausting. It's not just the thoughts themselves, it's the frustration of having them, the meta-level stress of knowing you should be asleep but can't be, the guilt of wasting time on something that happened years ago, the anger at yourself for not being able to let it go. And all of that piles on top of the original embarrassment, creating layers of discomfort that feel impossible to untangle. Psychologists who study sleep and cognition have found that pre-sleep cognitive activity, the mental chatter that happens as you're trying to fall asleep, significantly affects sleep quality. And rumination is one of the most disruptive types of pre-sleep activity. Because it's not just thinking, it's repetitive, emotionally charged thinking that loops back on itself. It keeps your mind activated when it should be winding down, keeps your nervous system alert when it should be settling, and the more you ruminate, the harder it becomes to fall asleep, which gives you more time to ruminate, which makes it even harder to fall asleep. It's another cycle, one that can stretch a bad night into a terrible one. And here's something that makes it even more complicated. The state you're in when you're trying to fall asleep, that liminal space between waking and sleeping, is a state where your mind is particularly vulnerable. Your defenses are down, your rational thinking is less accessible, you're more emotionally raw, and that rawness means that memories hit harder. The same embarrassing moment that you could contextualize and minimize during the day, when your rational mind is fully online, feels devastating at night when you're in that vulnerable in-between state. It's like everything gets amplified. The embarrassment feels more intense. The shame feels more real. The fear that everyone still remembers, still judges you, feels more plausible. Because you're not thinking clearly. You're not thinking at all, really. You're just feeling. And feelings, especially negative ones, expand to fill whatever space you give them. And at night, when there's nothing to contain them, they expand until they feel like the only thing that's real. This is why so many people describe nighttime thoughts as catastrophic, as distorted, as completely out of proportion to reality. Because they are. But in the moment, in the dark, with your rational mind offline and your emotions running the show, you can't always see that distortion. You can't always recognize that what you're feeling isn't the full truth. You're just inside it, overwhelmed by it, convinced that the way you feel right now is the way things actually are. And the isolation of nighttime makes it worse. During the day, if you're struggling, you can reach out, you can text a friend, you can talk to someone, you can get perspective from outside your own head. But at night, especially late at night, that feels impossible. Everyone else is asleep. You can't burden someone at 3 a.m. with your spiral about something you said wrong in 2015. So you sit with it alone, and the aloneness amplifies everything. Makes you feel like you're the only person in the world who's ever felt this way. Makes the embarrassment feel more isolating. Makes the memory feel heavier. But you're not alone, even though it feels that way. Even though the darkness and the silence and the stillness make it seem like you're the only one awake, the only one struggling, the only one replaying moments you wish you could erase. You're not. Right now, somewhere, someone else is lying in bed with the same kind of thoughts. Someone else is cringing at a memory. Someone else is wishing their brain would just let them rest. The experience is universal, even when it feels utterly solitary. And maybe that's one of the cruelest tricks of nighttime rumination. It isolates you from that sense of shared humanity. It makes you feel uniquely flawed, uniquely unable to let things go, uniquely tormented. But the truth is, the brain's tendency to replay difficult memories at night is as common as having dreams. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that you're human, that your brain is doing what human brains do, that you're navigating the same neurological and emotional landscape that everyone navigates. So when the night feels endless and the thoughts feel unbearable, and you're lying there wishing you could just turn your brain off, remember this. It's not just you. It's not just tonight. It's the human condition, made harder by darkness, by fatigue, by the way our brains shift into a different mode when the world goes quiet. The memories feel worse at night because nighttime is when we're most vulnerable, when our defenses are down, when there's nothing between us and the deepest parts of ourselves. And that vulnerability, as painful as it can be, is also just part of what it means to be awake and aware and alive. You can't always control when the memories come. You can't always stop the replay, but you can know that it's temporary, that the intensity you feel right now in the dark won't feel the same in the morning. That nighttime distorts, that fatigue amplifies, that this feeling, as overwhelming as it is, will shift. When the sun comes up and your mind comes back online, and the world offers you something else to focus on. It always does. The night doesn't last forever, and neither does this. And yet, even knowing that nighttime distorts, even understanding that your brain is just doing what brains do, there's still something at the core of these memories that makes them so painful. It's not just that you remember the embarrassing moment. It's that you remember it through the eyes of everyone who was there. You see yourself the way you imagine they saw you. You hear your own voice the way you think they heard it. You replay not just what happened, but what you believe it meant to them. And that imagined perspective, that constructed audience in your mind, is often harsher than reality ever was. This is what psychologists call the spotlight effect. It's the phenomenon where you believe that others are paying far more attention to you than they actually are. You feel like you're under a spotlight, like every move you make is being watched, scrutinized, remembered. And when you make a mistake, when you do something embarrassing, that spotlight feels blinding. You're certain that everyone saw, everyone noticed, Everyone is still thinking about it. But here's the truth, and it's both comforting and slightly humbling. Most people aren't paying that much attention to you, not because you don't matter, but because they're too busy paying attention to themselves. Think about it this way. When was the last time you witnessed someone else do something awkward? Maybe they stumbled over their words in a meeting. Maybe they spilled something. Maybe they made a joke that didn't land. Do you still think about it? Do you replay it in your mind? Do you judge them for it? Probably not. You probably noticed it in the moment, maybe felt a flash of second-hand embarrassment and then moved on. It didn't stick with you. It didn't define how you see that person. It was just a moment, and then it was gone. But when you're the one who stumbles, when you're the one whose joke falls flat, you assume everyone else is recording it the way you are. You assume they're thinking about it as much as you are. You assume it changed how they see you, and that assumption is almost always wrong, because they're not thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. They're worried about their own mistakes, their own awkward moments, their own fears of being judged. Everyone is walking around with their own internal spotlight, convinced that everyone else is watching them. This is one of the most persistent illusions of social life. We all feel like we're the main character, like our story is the one everyone else is following. But the truth is, everyone feels that way. Everyone is the main character in their own story, and in their story you're just a minor character, someone who passes through a scene and then exits. That embarrassing thing you did? In their story, it was barely a footnote. It might not even be remembered at all. Research on the spotlight effect has shown this over and over again. In one classic study, researchers had participants wear an embarrassing t-shirt into a room full of strangers. The participants were convinced that everyone would notice the shirt, that it would be the first thing people saw, that they'd be judged for it. But when the strangers were asked later what they remembered, most of them didn't even recall what the person was wearing. The spotlight the participants felt was entirely in their own heads. The audience wasn't paying nearly as much attention as they thought. And this applies to embarrassing moments too. The thing you said that came out wrong, the person you said it to probably forgot about it 5 minutes later. The awkward silence you created. The other people in the room likely filled it with their own thoughts and moved on. The joke that bombed? It might have been uncomfortable for a second, but then the conversation shifted and everyone's attention shifted with it. What feels monumentally important to you is often barely noticeable to everyone else. But your mind doesn't want to believe that, because if it did, if it fully accepted that other people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are, then it would have to let go of the story it's been telling. The story where you made a terrible mistake and everyone saw and everyone judged and everyone still remembers. That story feels true. It feels real. It feels like the only way to make sense of the embarrassment you felt in that moment. And so your mind clings to it, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. This is tied to something psychologists call the imaginary audience. It's a concept that was first studied in adolescence, those teenage years when you're hyper-aware of how others perceive you, when you feel like everyone is constantly watching and judging. But the truth is, the imaginary audience doesn't disappear when you turn 20 or 30 or 40. It just gets quieter, more subtle. But it's still there, still constructing a version of other people's thoughts that may have nothing to do with what they're actually thinking. The imaginary audience is made up of all the people you think are judging you. And it's imaginary not because those people don't exist, but because the judgments you're attributing to them are inventions. You're projecting onto them. You're filling in the blanks of what they might be thinking with your own fears and insecurities. And because you can't actually read minds, because you can't know for certain what anyone else is thinking, you default to the worst-case scenario. You assume they're thinking the critical thoughts you're thinking about yourself. And this is where it gets psychologically fascinating, because humans have an incredible ability to imagine other people's perspectives. It's called theory of mind, the capacity to understand that other people have thoughts, feelings, and intentions that are different from your own. It's what allows us to empathize, to predict behavior, to navigate social situations. We can put ourselves in someone else's shoes and imagine what they might be feeling or thinking. It's a beautiful, complex cognitive ability, but it has a shadow side, because sometimes we're too good at it. Sometimes we imagine other people's perspectives so vividly that we mistake our imagination for reality. This is powered, in part, by mirror neurons, these specialized brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform that action. They help you understand others by simulating their experiences in your own mind, and they're part of why you can feel embarrassment not just for yourself but for others, why you cringe when you watch someone else do something awkward. Your mirror neurons are letting you feel a version of what they might be feeling, but those same neurons can turn inward. They can make you imagine, with painful clarity, how others might have cringed at you, how they might have felt second-hand embarrassment on your behalf, how they might have looked at each other with that knowing glance that says, "Did that just happen?" And because you can simulate that so vividly in your mind, it feels real. It feels like proof, but it's not proof. It's just your very active imagination doing what it does best, creating a story. For people with social anxiety, this process is even more intense, because social anxiety is, at its core, a heightened fear of negative evaluation. It's the persistent worry that others are judging you, that they see your flaws, that they're thinking critical thoughts. And when you have social anxiety, your imaginary audience isn't just critical, it's relentless, it's harsh, it's convinced of your inadequacy. And every embarrassing moment becomes evidence that the audience is right, that you really are as awkward or incompetent or unlikable as you fear. This is where rejection sensitivity comes in. It's the tendency to anxiously expect, readily perceive, and intensely react to rejection. People who are high in rejection sensitivity are constantly scanning social situations for signs that they're being excluded or judged. And because they're looking for it, they often find it, even when it's not really there. A neutral facial expression becomes a frown. A moment of silence becomes evidence of disapproval. An offhand comment becomes proof that someone doesn't like them. And when you're rejection sensitive, embarrassing moments are especially painful, because they're not just awkward, they're confirmation of your deepest fear that you're not acceptable, that people will reject you, that you don't belong. So the moments replay, not just because they were embarrassing, but because they feel like they revealed something fundamental about your place in the social world. They feel like they proved that you were right to worry, right to be anxious, right to believe that you're always one mistake away from being cast out. But here's what rejection sensitivity often misses: the gap between what you fear and what's actually happening. Between the rejection you perceive and the reality of how others see you. Because most of the time, other people aren't thinking about you enough to reject you. They're too preoccupied with their own lives, their own worries, their own insecurities. And the moments you interpret as rejection are often just neutral moments that your anxiety has coloured with meaning. Think about the last time you replayed an embarrassing moment and imagined what everyone else must have thought. Really pause and ask yourself, do you have any actual evidence of what they thought? Did anyone say anything? Did anyone bring it up later? Did anyone treat you differently afterward? Or are you just assuming, based on your own discomfort, that they must have been uncomfortable too? That they must have judged you? That they must still remember? Most of the time, if you're honest, you don't have evidence. You have a feeling, a fear, an assumption, and you've built an entire narrative around that assumption. You've constructed dialogue in your head, imagined facial expressions, created a whole scene of judgment that may never have actually happened. And then you've replayed that scene so many times that it feels like a memory, like something you witnessed, but you didn't witness it. You invented it. This is the strange thing about the spotlight effect and the imaginary audience. They feel so real. The judgments feel so certain. The attention feels so focused. But they're mostly happening inside your own mind. Other people's actual thoughts, their actual memories of you, are often far gentler, far less interested, far more forgiving than the version you've constructed. And here's something that might bring relief. Even if someone did notice your embarrassing moment, even if they did think it was awkward in that instant, they've almost certainly forgotten it by now. Because human memory is selective. It prioritizes things that are emotionally relevant to the person doing the remembering. And your embarrassing moment, it wasn't emotionally relevant to them. It didn't carry the same charge. It didn't threaten their sense of self or their social standing. It was just something they witnessed briefly, and then they moved on to thinking about their own life. There's a concept in psychology called memory asymmetry. It's the idea that your memory of an event and someone else's memory of the same event can be wildly different. Not because one of you is lying or mistaken, but because you each encoded it differently. You encoded it as a deeply embarrassing, emotionally charged moment. They encoded it, if they encoded it at all, as a minor blip, a passing observation, something that didn't require deep storage. So while you're lying awake at night replaying the moment in vivid detail, analysing every word, every facial expression, every second of silence, the other person involved has probably forgotten it entirely. They're not lying awake thinking about you. They're lying awake thinking about their own embarrassments, their own mistakes, their own imaginary audience. Because everyone has one, and that's the paradox, isn't it? We're all so convinced that everyone else is focused on us, but we're all actually focused on ourselves. We're all walking around thinking we're being watched, being judged, being remembered. But we're all too busy worrying about how we're being perceived to actually perceive anyone else with that level of scrutiny. We're all so self-conscious that we barely have the mental space to be conscious of others. This doesn't mean your embarrassment wasn't real. It doesn't mean the moment didn't happen. It just means that the weight you're carrying, the judgment you're fearing, the audience you're imagining is far heavier than what anyone else is actually holding. You're the one keeping the memory alive. You're the one replaying it. You're the one who can't let it go. Not because you're weak or broken, but because it mattered to you in a way it didn't matter to anyone else. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay that you felt embarrassed, that the moment stung, that it left a mark. Because you're allowed to feel things deeply. You're allowed to care about how you come across. You're allowed to wish you'd done something differently. But you don't have to carry the added weight of everyone else's imagined judgment. You don't have to assume that they're still thinking about it, still holding it against you, still seeing you through the lens of that one moment, because they're not. They've moved on. They've forgotten. They've filled their minds with 1,000 other things, most of which involve their own lives, their own concerns, their own private embarrassments that they think everyone else remembers, but that you've probably forgotten entirely. So the next time you're replaying a moment and imagining what everyone must think, try to ask yourself, what do I actually know? What evidence do I have? And what am I just assuming based on my own fear? Because more often than not, you'll realize that the audience in your mind, the one that feels so real and so harsh, is mostly just you. You're the critic. You're the judge. You're the one who won't let it go. And that means something powerful. It means that the key to releasing these memories isn't in changing what other people think. It's in changing what you think. It's in recognizing that the spotlight you feel isn't coming from outside. It's coming from within. And you have more control over that than you realize. Not tonight, maybe. Not when you're tired and vulnerable and lying in the dark, but eventually, with time, with understanding, with the slow, gentle work of dismantling the imaginary audience and seeing the truth underneath. That you're not being watched as closely as you think. That you're not being judged as harshly as you fear. That most people, most of the time, are just trying to get through their own lives, not cataloguing your mistakes. You matter, but not in the way you think, not as a source of judgment or entertainment or cautionary tale. You matter because you're human, because you're here, because you're trying, and that's enough. Even when you stumble, even when you say the wrong thing, even when you replay it 1,000 times in the dark, you're still enough. And the people who matter, the people who truly see you, already know that. They're not holding that moment against you. They probably don't even remember it. And maybe, just maybe, you can start to let it go too. But letting go isn't always simple, because the embarrassing moment itself, the raw event, is only part of what you're carrying. What makes it so heavy, what keeps it replaying, isn't just what happened. It's what you've decided it means. It's the story you've told yourself about that moment, the narrative you've constructed around it. And that narrative, more than the event itself, is often what haunts you in the dark. Here's what happens. Something embarrassing occurs. You say the wrong thing, you misread a situation, you do something that makes you cringe. In that instant, there's a feeling. Embarrassment, discomfort, a flush of heat. But then, almost immediately, your mind starts working on it, starts interpreting it, starts turning a moment into a meaning. And that's where things get complicated, because the meaning you assign to that moment can transform it from something small and passing into something that feels like a revelation about who you are. There's a difference between thinking, I did something embarrassing, and thinking, I am embarrassing. Between, I made a mistake, and I am a mistake. One is about an action, a single instance, a moment in time. The other is about identity, about character, about the core of who you are. And somewhere in the space between the event and the memory, between what happened and how you remember it, that shift occurs. The moment stops being something you did and becomes something you are. This is the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt is uncomfortable, but it's also specific. It's about a behavior, an action, something that can be addressed or changed or apologized for. Shame is different. Shame is global. It's not about what you did. It's about what you are, and shame doesn't just make you want to fix the mistake. It makes you want to hide, to disappear, to never be seen again. The researcher Brené Brown has spent years studying shame, and one of the most important distinctions she makes is this: guilt is adaptive. It helps you recognize when you've done something that doesn't align with your values, and it motivates you to make amends. But shame is corrosive. It makes you believe that you're fundamentally flawed, that there's something wrong with you at your core, that you're unworthy of connection or belonging. And when an embarrassing moment triggers shame, when it activates that deep belief that you're not good enough, that's when the replaying becomes relentless. Because you're not just replaying the moment anymore, you're replaying the evidence. The proof that what you've always feared about yourself is true, that you're awkward, that you don't fit in, that you're too much or not enough, that there's something about you that others can see, something that marks you as different, as lesser, as someone who doesn't quite belong. And the embarrassing moment becomes the story you tell yourself about why you're not okay. But here's the thing about that story. It's not objective. It's not a neutral recording of what happened. It's a construction, an interpretation, a narrative you've built from the raw materials of memory, emotion, and belief. And every time you replay it, every time you revisit it in your mind, you're not just remembering it, you're reconstructing it. And in that reconstruction, you have the power to change it, to reinforce it, to make it mean something different than it meant before. This is what neuroscientists call memory reconsolidation. Every time you recall a memory, it becomes temporarily unstable, malleable, open to revision. And when you restore it, when you put it back into long-term memory, it can be slightly different than it was before. You might add details that weren't there originally. You might emphasize certain aspects and downplay others. You might layer on new emotions, new interpretations, new meanings. And over time, through repeated recall, the memory can drift further and further from the original event. So when you replay an embarrassing moment, you're not watching a video recording. You're participating in an act of creation. You're shaping the memory with each replay. And if you're replaying it through the lens of shame, if you're adding the interpretation that this moment proves something terrible about you, then that interpretation becomes part of the memory itself. It gets woven in, encoded, strengthened, until you can't separate the event from the meaning anymore. Until the two feel like the same thing. This is how a single moment can grow in significance over time. How something that might have been minor, something that might have been laughed off or forgotten, becomes a cornerstone of your self-concept. Because you keep returning to it, keep reinforcing it, keep adding layers of meaning and emotion until it's no longer just a memory. It's a story about who you are. And humans are storytelling creatures. We make sense of our lives through narrative. We take the scattered, chaotic events of our existence and arrange them into stories that have themes, patterns, meanings. We cast ourselves as characters. We identify turning points. We look for the threads that connect one moment to the next. And in doing so, we create a sense of continuity, a sense of self that persists across time. But the stories we tell about ourselves aren't always accurate. They're not always kind. Sometimes they're shaped more by our fears and insecurities than by the truth of what happened. And when you've experienced rejection, when you've felt like you didn't belong, when you've been hurt or criticized or made to feel small, your mind starts looking for patterns. It starts collecting evidence. And every new embarrassing moment becomes another piece of proof that the story you're afraid of is the story that's true. This is what psychologists call a negative self-schema. It's a deeply held belief about yourself, usually formed early in life, that acts as a filter for how you interpret new experiences. If your schema is, "I'm socially awkward," then every time you do something that could be interpreted as awkward, your mind flags it, notices it, stores it, and every time something happens that contradicts that schema, every time you have a perfectly fine social interaction, your mind might not even register it. Because it's not looking for evidence that you're okay. It's looking for evidence that confirms what it already believes. This is confirmation bias applied to your own identity. You pay more attention to information that supports your existing beliefs and ignore or minimize information that contradicts them. So if you believe you're embarrassing, you'll remember every awkward thing you've ever done in vivid detail. But you'll forget or dismiss the hundreds of interactions that went just fine. The ones where you were funny or kind or interesting or just perfectly normal. Those don't fit the story, so they don't get stored with the same intensity. And over time, this creates a distorted picture, a highlight reel of your worst moments, a collection of evidence that seems to prove, beyond doubt, that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way you move through the world. But it's not proof, it's selection bias. It's your mind cherry-picking the data to support a conclusion it's already committed to. The danger is that this narrative becomes self-fulfilling. If you believe you're awkward, you might become more anxious in social situations, and that anxiety might actually make you more awkward. You might stumble over your words because you're so worried about stumbling over your words. You might miss social cues because you're too focused on monitoring yourself. You might come across as stiff or uncomfortable because you're trying so hard not to do anything wrong. And then, when the interaction doesn't go well, your mind says, "See? I was right, I am awkward." But it wasn't the awkwardness that came first. It was the belief. The belief created the anxiety, and the anxiety created the outcome. This is the loop that shame creates. It tells you that you're not enough. That belief makes you anxious or self-conscious or overly cautious. That anxiety affects your behavior. Your behavior produces an outcome that feels like it confirms the original belief. And the loop tightens. The story gets stronger, the schema gets more entrenched. And the embarrassing moments pile up, not because you're fundamentally flawed, but because you're trapped in a narrative that keeps recreating itself. But narratives can change. Stories can be rewritten, not by denying what happened, not by pretending the embarrassing moments didn't occur, but by changing the meaning you assign to them, by loosening the grip of the interpretation, by recognizing that a moment is just a moment, not a verdict on your character. Because the truth is, everyone has embarrassing moments. Everyone says the wrong thing sometimes. Everyone misreads a situation, makes a social misstep, does something they wish they could take back. These moments are part of being human. They're not evidence of a flaw. They're just evidence of participation, of trying, of being alive and imperfect and learning as you go. But when you're in the grip of a shame narrative, when you've decided that these moments mean something about your fundamental worth, it's hard to see them that way. It's hard to hold them lightly, because you've made them heavy. You've wrapped them in significance. You've turned them into the story of why you don't belong, why you're not good enough, why you'll never be the person you want to be. And that story, painful as it is, can become strangely comfortable. Because at least it's familiar. At least it makes sense of the discomfort you feel. At least it gives you an explanation for why things are hard. If you let go of the story, if you stop believing that you're fundamentally awkward or inadequate or wrong, then you have to sit with uncertainty. You have to accept that maybe you're just a person, just a regular imperfect person who sometimes does embarrassing things and sometimes doesn't. And that uncertainty can feel more frightening than the certainty of shame. Because shame, for all its pain, is a form of control. If you can identify exactly what's wrong with you, if you can pinpoint the flaw, then maybe you can fix it. Maybe you can become someone else, someone better, someone who doesn't make mistakes. But that's an illusion, because there's nothing to fix. You're not broken. You're just human. And being human means being imperfect. It means making mistakes. It means having moments you wish you could do over, and no amount of shame will change that. What shame does instead is keep you stuck. It keeps you replaying the same moments, reinforcing the same narrative, believing the same story about yourself. And every time you replay, every time you reconsolidate that memory with the added layer of, this is who I am, you make it harder to see yourself any other way. You make the story more solid, more real, more unshakable. But it doesn't have to be unshakable, because every time you recall a memory, it's not just an opportunity to reinforce it, it's also an opportunity to revise it, to add a different interpretation, to see it through a different lens, not to deny what happened, but to question what it means, to ask, does this one moment really define me? Does this one mistake really prove that I'm inadequate? Or is it just a moment, just one small piece of a much larger, more complex story? And what if the story you've been telling yourself isn't the only story available? What if there's another version, one where you're not the flawed character who keeps messing up, but the brave character who keeps trying despite the fear? What if the embarrassing moments aren't evidence of your inadequacy, but evidence of your willingness to show up, to be vulnerable, to take risks in a world that doesn't come with a script? That's not positive thinking. That's not pretending the embarrassment didn't hurt. It's just a different story, a different meaning, and it's just as valid, maybe more valid than the one that says you're broken. Because the truth is, no single moment can define you. No single mistake can capture the fullness of who you are. You're too complex for that, too evolving, too multifaceted. You contain hundreds of moments, thousands of interactions, years of growth and change and learning. And reducing all of that to one embarrassing instance is like trying to capture the ocean in a single drop of water. You're not a fixed thing. You're not a finished story. You're still being written. And the moments you're replaying, the ones that feel so defining, they're just chapters, just scenes, just brief snapshots in a narrative that's still unfolding. They don't have to be the climax. They don't have to be the thesis. They can just be what they are. Moments when you were learning, when you were trying, when you were being imperfectly, beautifully human, and maybe that's the story worth holding on to. Not the one where you're inadequate, not the one where every mistake proves something terrible about your character, but the one where you're enough, where you've always been enough, where the embarrassing moments are just part of the journey, not the destination, where you're allowed to stumble and still be worthy, where your value doesn't depend on never making mistakes, but on the courage to keep going even when you do. That's a harder story to believe sometimes, especially when the shame narrative has been with you for so long, especially when you've reinforced it so many times that it feels like truth. but it's there, that other story, that kinder interpretation, and every time you choose to see yourself through that lens, even just for a moment, you're starting to rewrite the narrative. You're starting to loosen shame's grip. You're starting to remember that you're more than the sum of your most cringeworthy moments. You always have been. And maybe there's something else worth considering. Something that might shift the way you see yourself entirely. Because the fact that you replay these moments, the fact that you care so deeply about how your words and actions affected others, the fact that you lie awake analysing social interactions from every possible angle, that's not just a burden, it's also a sign of something beautiful, something that the world needs more of, not less. People who replay embarrassing moments at night are often the most empathetic people you'll ever meet. They're the ones who notice when someone's feeling left out, who remember the small details of what you said last week, who can read a room with startling accuracy, who feel things deeply, not just their own emotions, but the emotions of everyone around them. And that capacity for empathy, for attunement, for sensitivity to the emotional landscape of social situations, that's what makes them replay. Because if you didn't care about other people's feelings, if you weren't tuned in to how your actions might affect them, you wouldn't spend a single second worrying about whether your joke landed wrong, or whether you talked too much, or whether you made someone uncomfortable. You just move through the world without a second thought. But you don't. You think about it. You turn it over in your mind. You analyse it from every angle, trying to understand what happened, how it was received, what it meant. And yes, sometimes that analysis becomes painful. Sometimes it tips into rumination, into self-punishment, into a loop that doesn't serve you. But the impulse underneath it, the reason you care in the first place, that's empathy. That's social awareness. That's a deep fundamental concern for the well-being of others and for the quality of your connections with them. And that's not a flaw. That's a gift. Think about the alternative. Think about people who never replay their social interactions, who never wonder if they said the wrong thing, who never lie awake thinking about how their words might have landed. Some of those people have found a healthy balance, sure. They've learned to trust themselves, to let go of what they can't control, to move through social situations with confidence and ease. But others, the ones who truly never think about it, they're often the ones lacking empathy. The ones who don't notice when they've hurt someone, who don't register the impact of their words, who move through the world leaving small wounds behind them without ever realizing it. You're not that person. You could never be that person, because you feel too much, you notice too much, you care too much. And while that caring can become overwhelming, while it can turn into the kind of rumination that keeps you awake at night, it also makes you someone who tries, someone who wants to do better, someone who values connection and kindness and the emotional safety of the people around you. This is connected to something psychologists call trait empathy. It's the stable tendency to experience empathy across situations and over time. And people who score high in trait empathy don't just feel their own emotions intensely, they feel other people's emotions too. They can put themselves in someone else's position and imagine what that person is experiencing. They can sense discomfort, pick up on subtle cues, read between the lines of what's being said. And that sensitivity is a form of intelligence, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, the ability to navigate the complex, often unspoken dynamics of human interaction. But here's the thing about being highly empathetic. It means you're constantly aware of how your actions ripple outward. You're conscious of the fact that your words have weight, that your behavior affects others, that every interaction is an opportunity to either build connection or damage it. And that awareness can be exhausting, because it means you're always monitoring yourself, always checking, always asking did I do that right? Did I hurt someone? Did I make things worse? And when you inevitably make a mistake, when you say something that doesn't land the way you intended, or when you misread a situation, that mistake doesn't just feel like a small misstep. It feels like a betrayal of your own values, because you care about not hurting people. You care about being kind, being thoughtful, being someone who contributes positively to the emotional atmosphere of a room. So when you fail at that, even in a small way, it cuts deep. It activates not just embarrassment, but a kind of moral discomfort, a sense that you violated something important. This is where conscientiousness comes in. It's one of the big 5 personality traits, and it's characterized by a tendency to be organized, responsible, and mindful of how your behavior affects outcomes. Conscientious people set high standards for themselves. They care about doing things well. They feel a sense of duty, not just to complete tasks, but to show up as the kind of person they want to be. And when it comes to social situations, highly conscientious people often hold themselves to an impossibly high standard. They want to get it right, to say the perfect thing, to make everyone feel comfortable. And when they don't, when they fall short of that standard, they punish themselves for it. So if you're both empathetic and conscientious, if you're someone who feels deeply and who cares about doing right by others, then of course you replay embarrassing moments. Of course you analyze them. Of course you wish you could go back and do it differently, because the moment isn't just about you. It's about your impact on someone else. It's about whether you lived up to the kind of person you're trying to be. And that matters to you in a way it might not matter to someone else. There's also something called rejection sensitivity, and while it's often talked about as a vulnerability, it's also a form of social attunement. People who are rejection sensitive are highly alert to signs that they might be excluded or judged or disliked. And that alertness, while it can be painful, is also a form of awareness. It means they're paying attention. They're noticing the subtle shifts in tone, the flicker of an expression, the slight change in someone's energy. They're reading the room at a level of detail that others might miss entirely. And that skill, that ability to pick up on subtle social cues, is valuable. It's what makes someone a good friend, a good listener, a good collaborator. It's what allows people to navigate complex social dynamics, to sense when someone needs support, to adjust their behavior based on what the situation requires. But the shadow side is that you also pick up on cues that might not even be there. You interpret a neutral expression as disapproval. You read a moment of silence as rejection. You see patterns of exclusion even when the reality is far more benign. So the same sensitivity that makes you kind and attuned and responsive to others is also the sensitivity that makes you vulnerable to overthinking, to rumination, to lying awake replaying moments that probably didn't mean to anyone else what they meant to you. And that's the paradox. Your greatest strength is also your greatest source of pain. But here's what's important to remember. The pain doesn't negate the strength. The fact that your empathy sometimes hurts doesn't mean you should try to turn it off. Because you can't. Not without losing something essential about who you are. Not without becoming someone harder, someone more defended, someone less able to connect deeply with others. And that's not the answer. The answer isn't to stop caring. It's to learn how to care without destroying yourself in the process. There's a difference between healthy social awareness and self-punishment. Healthy social awareness means you notice how your actions affect others, and you use that information to grow, to learn, to adjust your behavior in ways that align with your values. It means you can look at a social interaction, recognize that something didn't go well, and think, okay, next time I'll try a different approach. It's reflective, it's constructive, it's oriented toward growth. Self-punishment, on the other hand, doesn't have that forward momentum. It's stuck in the past. It's repetitive. It's not asking, what can I learn from this? It's saying, I'm terrible. I'm always terrible. I'll never get this right. It's not about growth. It's about reinforcement of a negative self-concept. And that's where the line is. That's where empathy and conscientiousness tip from being gifts into being sources of suffering. And if you're someone who replays embarrassing moments at night, chances are you've crossed that line more than once. Chances are you've taken your natural sensitivity and turned it inward, weaponized it against yourself, used it as evidence of your inadequacy rather than as proof of your humanity. But that doesn't mean the sensitivity itself is the problem. It means you haven't yet learned how to hold it gently, how to use it wisely, how to let it inform you without consuming you. Because the truth is, the world needs people like you. People who think about their impact. People who care about whether their words hurt someone. People who notice when someone's struggling and who adjust their behavior to make space for that struggle. The world doesn't need more people who move through life oblivious to the wake they leave behind. It needs more people who are paying attention, who are trying, who are willing to feel uncomfortable in the service of being kind. And that's what you're doing, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when the replaying feels like torture, even when you're lying in the dark wishing you could just stop thinking about it. You're trying to be better. You're trying to understand. You're trying to make sure that your existence in the world is a net positive, that you're contributing to connection rather than harm. And that intention, that deep care, that's beautiful, that's rare, that's something to honor, not something to pathologize. So maybe the question isn't, why do I replay these moments? Maybe the question is, how can I honor my sensitivity while also being kind to myself? How can you maintain your empathy, your social awareness, your deep care for others without letting it become a weapon you use against yourself? How can you notice your impact, learn from your mistakes, and still treat yourself with the same compassion you extend to everyone else? Because here's what often happens. People who are highly empathetic are incredibly compassionate toward others. They make excuses for other people's mistakes. They offer grace, understanding, forgiveness. They see the humanity in everyone. But when it comes to themselves, when it comes to their own mistakes, they're ruthless. They hold themselves to a standard they'd never hold anyone else to. They judge themselves with a harshness they'd never turn on a friend. And that double standard is worth examining. Because if you can forgive someone else for saying the wrong thing, for being awkward, for making a social misstep, why can't you forgive yourself? What makes your mistake so much worse than anyone else's? What makes you exempt from the grace you so freely give to others? The answer usually is shame, the belief that you should know better, that you should be better, that your sensitivity, your awareness, your empathy should somehow make you immune to social mistakes. But that's not how it works. Being highly attuned doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you'll never misread a situation or say something that comes out wrong or feel awkward in a social setting. It just means you'll notice when it happens. You'll feel it more acutely, and you'll care more deeply about fixing it. But caring deeply doesn't require self-punishment. It doesn't require replaying the moment 1,000 times. It doesn't require lying awake at night, cataloguing all the ways you failed. Caring deeply can look like noticing what happened, acknowledging how you feel about it, and then making a choice about what to do next. It can look like reaching out to apologize if an apology is needed, or recognizing that the moment wasn't as significant as your anxiety is telling you it was, or simply accepting that you're human and humans make mistakes and that's okay. Your sensitivity is a gift. Your empathy is a strength. Your conscientiousness is a virtue. But they become burdens when you use them to fuel shame instead of growth. When you let them convince you that you're not good enough, that you're fundamentally flawed, that you'll never belong. Because that's not what they're for. They're not tools for self-destruction. They're tools for connection, for understanding, for building the kind of relationships and communities that are grounded in mutual care and respect. And you're already using them that way, whether you realize it or not. The fact that you care about your impact, the fact that you think about how your words land, the fact that you want to be someone who makes others feel safe and seen, you're already contributing something valuable to the world. You're already being the kind of person who makes things better just by paying attention. And that's not diminished by the fact that you sometimes make mistakes. If anything, it's enhanced by it. Because you're not just paying attention when things go well, you're paying attention when things go wrong too. You're learning, you're growing, you're trying to do better. And that's all anyone can do. Try, show up, pay attention, adjust, learn, forgive yourself and keep going. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You don't have to never make mistakes to deserve connection. You just have to be human, imperfect, sensitive, caring, trying your best human. And you already are that. You've always been that, even in the moments you replay. Even in the moments you wish you could forget, you were still that person, doing your best with what you knew, trying to navigate the impossibly complex world of human interaction with grace and care. So the next time you find yourself replaying an embarrassing moment, try to remember this. The fact that you care is not a weakness. The fact that you notice is not a flaw. The fact that you're lying there thinking about it, wishing you'd done it differently, that's not evidence of your inadequacy. It's evidence of your humanity, your empathy, your deep, beautiful, exhausting capacity to care about others and about the quality of your connections with them. And maybe, just maybe, that's something worth celebrating. Not the rumination itself, not the pain of the replay, but the heart underneath it. The part of you that cares so much, feels so deeply, tries so hard. That part of you is precious, and it deserves kindness, not just from others, but from you. But even with that kindness, even with the understanding that your sensitivity is a gift and not a curse, there's still the practical question. The one you might be asking right now, lying in the dark. How do you actually stop replaying these moments? How do you get your brain to just let it go? And the answer, the one you probably don't want to hear, is that trying to stop thinking about it is often the exact thing that makes it worse. You've probably noticed this already. You're lying there, and the embarrassing memory surfaces, and your immediate response is to push it away. To tell yourself, stop thinking about that. Just stop. You try to redirect your attention, to focus on something else, anything else. You might even say it out loud, a frustrated whisper in the dark. Stop it. Don't think about it. And for a moment, maybe it works. Maybe the thought recedes, but then a few seconds later or a few minutes later it comes back, often stronger than before, more insistent, more difficult to ignore. This isn't a failure of willpower. It's not because you're not trying hard enough. It's because of the way the human mind works when you try to suppress a thought. And there's a famous psychology experiment that illustrates this perfectly. It's called the White Bear Study, and it was conducted by a psychologist named Daniel Wegner back in the late 1980s. Here's what he did. He asked participants to sit in a room for 5 minutes and told them they could think about anything they wanted, except for one thing. They were not allowed to think about White Bear, and if they did happen to think about a white bear, they were supposed to ring a bell. Simple enough, right? Just don't think about white bears. How hard could it be? Turns out, incredibly hard. Participants rang the bell constantly. The instruction not to think about the white bear made them think about it more. It brought the white bear to the forefront of their consciousness, made it the most salient thing in their awareness. And the more they tried not to think about it, the more it dominated their thoughts. That's ironic process theory. The idea that trying to suppress a thought ironically makes that thought more likely to occur. And it gets worse. After the 5 minutes were up, Wegner told the participants they could now think about whatever they wanted, including white bears. And what happened? They thought about white bears even more than a control group who'd been told to think about white bears from the start. This is called the rebound effect. When you suppress a thought and then you stop actively suppressing it, the thought comes flooding back with even greater intensity. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. The harder you push it down, the more forcefully it pops back up when you let go. This is exactly what happens when you try not to think about an embarrassing moment. The act of trying not to think about it makes it more present. It gives the thought more power, more weight, more centrality in your mind. Because in order to not think about something, you have to monitor your thoughts to make sure the forbidden thought isn't appearing. And the monitoring requires you to keep the thought in your awareness, at least peripherally. You're constantly checking. Am I thinking about it? No? Good. Am I thinking about it now? Oh no, I am. And the checking itself becomes a form of thinking about it. It's a cognitive trap, a mental loop that's almost impossible to escape once you're in it. Because the harder you try to suppress the thought, the more mental resources you have to dedicate to the suppression. And those resources, that mental energy, is finite. You only have so much of it. And when you're tired, when it's late at night and you're trying to fall asleep, you have even less. Your capacity for mental control is depleted. And so the suppression starts to fail. The thought breaks through. And then you try even harder to push it away, which makes it come back even stronger, which exhausts you further, which weakens your control, which lets the thought intrude more frequently. It's a downward spiral, and this is exhausting, not just mentally, but emotionally. Because every time the thought resurfaces, every time the suppression fails, it feels like evidence that something is wrong with you, that you're weak, that you can't even control your own mind. But that's not true. You're not weak. You're just fighting against the basic architecture of how thoughts work, and that's a fight you can't win through force alone. Psychologists call this metacognition, thinking about thinking, and when you're trying to suppress a thought, you're engaged in a very specific kind of metacognitive activity. You're monitoring your mental content, watching for the appearance of the unwanted thought, ready to redirect as soon as it shows up. But that monitoring is itself a form of attention. And attention, in the world of cognitive psychology, is like a spotlight. Whatever you shine it on becomes brighter, more vivid, more present. So when you're monitoring for the thought, when you're scanning your mind to make sure it's not there, you're actually keeping it in the spotlight. You're giving it the very attention you're trying to withdraw. This is why distraction sometimes works, but only temporarily. When you grab your phone, when you turn on a podcast, when you focus intently on counting backwards from 100, you're redirecting the spotlight. You're shining it on something else. And for a moment, the embarrassing memory recedes. It's no longer in the center of your awareness. But the problem is, distraction is effortful. It requires you to actively maintain focus on something else. And the moment your focus wavers, the moment you stop actively distracting yourself, the memory is right there, waiting. Because you never actually processed it. You never resolved it. You just temporarily covered it up. And that's the fundamental issue with suppression and distraction. They don't address the underlying emotional charge of the memory. They don't reduce its power. They just push it aside for a little while. And pushing something aside repeatedly, without ever actually dealing with it, takes a toll. It's cognitively exhausting. It keeps part of your mind perpetually occupied with the task of not thinking about the thing you don't want to think about. And that occupation drains your mental resources, leaves you with less capacity for everything else, makes you more vulnerable to stress and overwhelm. There's also something called experiential avoidance, a concept from acceptance and commitment therapy. It's the attempt to avoid, suppress, or escape from unwanted internal experiences, whether those are thoughts, emotions, memories, or physical sensations. And while avoidance can feel protective in the short term, while it can give you a temporary sense of relief, in the long term it actually makes things worse. Because the more you avoid something, the more you teach your brain that it's dangerous, that it's something to be feared, that it's intolerable. So when you try to avoid thinking about an embarrassing memory, when you treat it like a threat that must be neutralized, you're sending your brain a message. You're saying, "This thought is dangerous. This memory is unbearable. I can't handle this." And your brain listens. It starts to treat that memory as something catastrophic, something that needs to be monitored and controlled and kept at bay. And that makes the memory more intrusive, not less. Because your brain is now on high alert for it. It's flagged as important, as threatening, as something that requires constant vigilance. This is the paradox. The more you try to control your thoughts, the less control you actually have. The more you try to push the memory away, the more insistently it returns. And the more you treat it like something intolerable, the more intolerable it becomes. You're caught in a loop of your own making, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're trying to solve the problem in a way that fundamentally can't work. And this isn't just about embarrassing memories. This pattern shows up everywhere. People who try to suppress anxious thoughts end up more anxious. People who try to suppress sad thoughts end up more depressed. People who try to suppress cravings end up giving into them more often. Suppression, as a strategy, backfires across the board. It's one of the most consistent findings in cognitive psychology, and yet it's also one of the most intuitive strategies. Because it feels right. It feels like the solution. If you don't want to think about something, just stop thinking about it. Simple. Except it's not. So what's the alternative? If suppression doesn't work, if distraction only provides temporary relief, If trying to control your thoughts just makes them more uncontrollable, then what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to get the memory to stop replaying? The answer, and this might feel counterintuitive, is to stop trying to make it stop, to stop fighting it, to stop treating it like an enemy that needs to be defeated, because the fight itself is what's keeping it alive. The resistance is what's giving it power, and when you stop resisting, when you stop trying to push it away, something shifts. The memory loses its urgency, its intensity, its grip on you. This doesn't mean you have to like the memory. It doesn't mean you have to want it to be there. It just means you stop expending energy trying to make it disappear. You let it be there in the background of your awareness without engaging with it, without analyzing it, without fighting it. You acknowledge it, the way you might acknowledge a sound outside your window. You notice it and then you let it pass. You don't grab onto it. You don't push it away. You just let it exist. This is the core principle of acceptance. Not acceptance in the sense of resignation or giving up, but acceptance in the sense of allowing. Allowing the thought to be there without needing to change it. Allowing the memory to surface without needing to suppress it. Allowing the discomfort without needing to escape it. And this allowing, paradoxically, is what creates the space for the thought to naturally fade. Because thoughts, left to their own devices, don't last forever. They arise, they peak, and they pass. Like waves, they have a natural rhythm, a natural life cycle. But when you grab onto them, when you fight them, you interrupt that cycle. You keep them activated, you sustain them, and when you suppress them, when you push them down, you create pressure. And that pressure has to release eventually. And when it does, the thought comes back stronger. But when you just let the thought be, when you observe it without engaging, it completes its cycle. It arises, it exists for a moment, and then it fades. And the next time it arises, it's a little less intense, a little less charged, because you're not feeding it with your resistance. You're not reinforcing it with your attention. You're just letting it move through you, the way clouds move through the sky. This takes practice. It's not something you can just decide to do once and have it work perfectly, because your instinct, especially when the thought is painful or shameful, is to push it away, to make it stop. And that instinct is strong. It's been reinforced by years of trying to avoid discomfort. But every time you notice the thought and choose not to fight it, every time you let it be there without trying to control it, you're weakening that instinct. You're teaching your brain that the thought isn't dangerous, that it's just a thought, that you can handle it without needing to suppress it. And over time, something remarkable happens. The thought loses its power. The memory stops feeling so urgent. The replay becomes less frequent, less vivid, less emotionally charged. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped fighting it. Not because you controlled it, but because you let go of the need for control. This is the difference between suppression and acceptance. Suppression is active, effortful, exhausting. It requires you to constantly monitor and manage and push away. Acceptance is passive, allowing, restful. It requires you to do less, not more. To let go, not hold on. To trust that the thought will pass on its own without your intervention. And that trust is hard to come by. Because when you're lying in the dark, when the memory is vivid and the emotions are raw, it doesn't feel like it will ever pass. It feels permanent, inescapable, like it will last forever. But that's just the distortion of the moment. That's the intensity talking. Because nothing lasts forever. Not the good feelings, and not the bad ones either. Everything is temporary. Everything moves. Everything changes. The embarrassing memory you're replaying right now, the one that feels so heavy, so unbearable, it will fade. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And the more you stop fighting it, the more you let it be, the faster it will fade. Because you're no longer giving it the fuel it needs to stay alive. You're no longer treating it like a crisis. You're just letting it be what it is. A memory. An uncomfortable one, yes, but just a memory. And memories, when you stop clinging to them, have a way of softening, of losing their edges, of becoming just one more thing that happened in a life full of things that happened. So maybe tonight, if the memory surfaces, you don't have to fight it. You don't have to tell yourself to stop thinking about it. You can just notice it, let it be there. And then gently, without force, turn your attention to something else. Not as a way to suppress the thought, but as a way to practice letting it pass. To practice allowing it to move through you without needing to control it. And if it comes back, that's okay. You notice it again, you let it be again. And slowly, gradually, with patience and practice, it becomes easier. The memory becomes less intrusive, the replay becomes less frequent, and you find that you can rest, even with the thought nearby, because you're no longer at war with it. You're just letting it be. And maybe one of the most comforting truths about these memories, one that's hard to believe when you're in the thick of the replay, is that time changes everything. The embarrassing moment that feels unbearable tonight will not feel the same in a year, or 5 years, or 10. Not because you'll forget it completely, though you might, but because the emotional charge will fade. The sting will soften, the meaning will shift, and what once felt like proof of your fundamental inadequacy will become just another moment in the long, winding story of learning how to be human. There's a phenomenon in psychology called the fading affect bias. It's the tendency for the negative emotions attached to memories to fade faster than the positive emotions. Researchers have found this pattern again and again. When people recall events from their past, the unpleasant memories lose their emotional intensity more quickly over time than the pleasant ones do. The sadness softens, the anger cools, the embarrassment becomes less sharp. Meanwhile, positive memories tend to retain their warmth, their glow, their capacity to make you smile even years later. This isn't just wishful thinking, it's a measurable psychological process. And it happens, researchers believe, because humans have a natural tendency toward emotional homeostasis, toward balance, toward not staying stuck in negative emotional states longer than necessary. Your mind, for all its tendency to replay difficult moments, also has a built-in mechanism for healing, for letting go, for allowing the past to become less painful as it recedes into distance. But the fading doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual, almost imperceptible. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly find that the embarrassing memory no longer bothers you. It's more subtle than that. You think about it one day and realize it doesn't hurt quite as much as it used to. The flush of heat doesn't come as quickly. The stomach drop is less pronounced. The cringe is there, maybe, but it's gentler, more distant, like watching something happen to someone else. Someone you used to be but aren't quite anymore. Because that's another thing that happens with time. You change. And the person who experienced that embarrassing moment, the person you were back then, starts to feel separate from who you are now. Psychologists call this temporal self-appraisal. It's the way you evaluate your past self from the vantage point of your present self. And the further back you go, the more distance there is between who you were and who you are now. The easier it becomes to view that past self with compassion, with understanding, even with a kind of tenderness. You can look back and think, I was doing the best I could with what I knew then. Or, I was so young. Or, I didn't understand yet how that kind of situation worked. There's a softness in that retrospective view that's hard to access when the event is recent, when you're still too close to it, when the past self and the present self feel like the same person, but give it time and that separation grows, and with it, a kind of forgiveness becomes possible. Think about an embarrassing moment from your childhood, something that mortified you at the time. Maybe you were 8 or 10 or 12, and you said something or did something that made you want to disappear. Can you remember how that felt? Probably. But does it still carry the same emotional weight? Probably not. You can look back at that child, at who you were, and feel affection for them. You can see how small they were, how much they were still learning, how understandable it was that they made that mistake. And the embarrassment, if it's still there at all, is softened by perspective, by the knowledge that everyone was awkward at that age, that everyone made mistakes, that it was just part of growing up. That same process happens with more recent embarrassments too. It just takes longer, because the gap between who you were 2 years ago and who you are now is smaller than the gap between who you were at 10 and who you are now. But the gap is still there. You're not the same person you were 2 years ago. You've had experiences since then. You've learned things. You've grown in ways you might not even fully recognize. And the person who made that mistake, who had that embarrassing moment, they were operating with less information, less experience, less context than you have now. This is what psychologists call psychological distance. And it's not just about time, it's about the way time creates space between you and the event. The further away something is, temporally, the less immediate it feels, the less it feels like it's happening to you, right now, in the present. And that distance allows for a different kind of processing, a more abstract, more compassionate, more forgiving kind of processing. When something just happened, when it's fresh and raw, you experience it in vivid detail. You remember the exact words, the exact expressions, the exact sensations. It's concrete, it's specific, it's visceral. But as time passes, those details start to blur. The memory becomes less about the specifics and more about the general gist, the essence, the story you tell yourself about what happened. And in that transition from concrete to abstract, something softens. The memory becomes less about reliving and more about reflecting. Less about the pain and more about the lesson, if there is one. And sometimes, given enough time, the embarrassing moment becomes something else entirely. It becomes funny. Not funny in a dismissive way, not funny like it didn't matter, but funny in the way that human awkwardness can be funny when you're no longer in the middle of it. You can look back and laugh at yourself, not cruelly, but with a kind of affectionate amusement. I can't believe I thought that was such a big deal. Or, that was so awkward, but honestly, it's kind of hilarious now. This transformation doesn't happen with every embarrassing memory. Some stay tender longer than others. Some never quite become funny. But many of them do shift. Many of them lose their power to wound. And the ones that felt catastrophic at the time the ones you were certain you'd never recover from, often become the stories you tell at dinner parties, the anecdotes that make people laugh, the moments that, in retrospect, reveal something charming about your humanity rather than something shameful. But right now, lying in the dark, that transformation probably feels impossible. The memory you're replaying doesn't feel like it will ever be funny. It doesn't feel like something you'll look back on with affection or amusement. It feels heavy, permanent, unchangeable. And that's okay. That's where you are right now. You don't have to force yourself to find it funny or to pretend it doesn't hurt. The hurt is real. The discomfort is real. And it's allowed to be there. But what's also real is that this feeling, as intense as it is, will change. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but eventually. Because that's what feelings do. They move, they shift, they evolve. And the memory that feels unbearable tonight will, with time, become something you can hold more lightly. Something you can think about without your whole body tensing up. Something that's just part of your history rather than a defining feature of your identity. There's also something to be said for the new experiences you'll have between now and then. Between this moment and the moment when the memory finally loses its sting. Because every day you live, every interaction you have, every moment of connection or kindness or competence, those become part of your story too. They add context, they provide counter-evidence, they show you, and anyone who knows you, that you're more than that one awkward moment, that you're capable of grace and skill and warmth and all the things you fear you're not. And as those new experiences accumulate, the old embarrassing moment becomes a smaller and smaller part of the whole. It doesn't disappear, but it gets integrated. It becomes one thread in a much larger tapestry. And when you look at the tapestry as a whole, when you step back and see the full picture of who you are and who you've been, that one thread doesn't dominate anymore. It's just there, woven in with everything else. Not invisible, but not overwhelming either. This is the process of meaning-making that happens over time. You take an event and you fit it into the larger narrative of your life, and the meaning it has, the significance you assign to it, can change as the narrative grows. What felt like a turning point, like a moment that defined you, might become just a footnote, a minor detail in a much bigger story. Or it might become something else, a moment of vulnerability that taught you something important, a catalyst for growth, a reminder that you're human, and humans stumble and that's okay. The meaning isn't fixed. It's not set in stone the moment the event happens. It's fluid, evolving, shaped by everything that comes after. And that's hopeful in a way, because it means that even if the memory feels terrible right now, even if the meaning you're assigning to it is harsh and unforgiving, that meaning can change. It can soften. It can transform into something gentler, something wiser, something that serves you rather than punishing you. But you can't force that transformation. You can't think your way into it. It's not something you do. It's something that happens slowly as you live your life and accumulate new experiences and gain new perspectives. It's a natural process, like healing. Like the way a cut on your skin closes over time without you having to consciously direct it. Your psyche has its own healing mechanisms, its own ways of integrating difficult experiences and reducing their emotional charge. And if you let it, if you don't constantly pick at the wound by replaying and ruminating and reinforcing the shame, it will heal. And one day, maybe years from now, you'll think about this moment, the embarrassing one you're replaying tonight, and you'll be surprised by how little it bothers you. You might even struggle to remember exactly what was said or what happened. The details will have faded, the emotional charge will have dissipated, and you'll think, I can't believe I lost so much sleep over that. Not because it didn't matter at the time, but because time gave you the distance you needed to see it differently, to see yourself differently. There's also the possibility, and this is worth considering, that you'll look back and realise the moment wasn't as bad as you thought it was, that your perception of it, your interpretation of how it was received, was distorted by your own anxiety and self-consciousness, that what felt like a catastrophic social failure was actually just a normal, awkward human moment that no one else gave a second thought to, and you'll feel a mixture of relief and regret. Relief that it wasn't as bad as you thought. Regret that you spent so much time suffering over something that didn't warrant that much suffering. But even that regret will be gentle, because you'll understand why you suffered. You'll see that you were doing the best you could with the information you had, with the emotional resources you had, with the level of self-awareness and self-compassion you had at the time, and you'll forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now, for not being able to let it go sooner, for replaying it so many times in the dark, because that's the gift of time. It doesn't just fade the affect, it doesn't just create distance between you and the event, it also creates compassion, perspective, the ability to look back and see your struggles with kindness rather than judgment, to understand that you were trying, that you were learning, that you were navigating the impossible complexity of being human and being seen and wanting to belong, and that it's okay that you didn't always get it right. You didn't need to get it right. You just needed to keep going, keep showing up, keep trying. And you did. You are. Even now, lying here replaying this memory, you're still here, still trying to understand, still trying to grow, still moving forward even when it doesn't feel like it. And that's enough. That's always been enough. So maybe tonight you can hold on to that. The knowledge that time is working in your favour. That even though the memory feels heavy now, it won't always feel this way. That the future version of you, the one who's further down the road, will look back on this moment, this night, this replay, with understanding, with compassion, maybe even with gratitude for how far you've come, for how much you've learned, for the ways you've grown since then. You don't have to believe it fully, you don't have to feel it yet, but you can trust it. Trust that time does what it does. That distance brings perspective. That healing, even when you can't see it happening, is happening slowly, quietly, in the background of your life. And one day you'll notice that the weight you're carrying isn't as heavy as it used to be. And you'll realize that somewhere along the way, without you even noticing, you let it go. Not all at once. Not in a single decisive moment, but gradually, gently. The way morning light gradually fills a room, so slowly you don't notice it happening until suddenly you realize you can see. But between now and that eventual softening, between this moment and the future where the memory has lost its sting, there's something you can do. Not to force the healing, not to speed it up artificially, but to support it, to create the conditions where it becomes possible. And that something is self-compassion. It's the quiet, radical act of treating yourself the way you'd treat someone you love, of speaking to yourself the way you'd speak to a friend who's hurting, of holding your own pain with the same tenderness you'd offer to anyone else. Self-compassion isn't about letting yourself off the hook. It's not about pretending the embarrassing moment didn't happen or that it didn't matter. It's not about lowering your standards or giving up on growth. It's something different entirely. It's about recognizing that you're human, that humans make mistakes, and that making mistakes doesn't make you unworthy of kindness, especially not your own kindness. The researcher Kristin Neff has spent decades studying self-compassion, and she's identified 3 core components that make it up. 3 elements that, when practiced together, create a fundamentally different relationship with your own suffering. The first is self-kindness. It's the practice of being warm and understanding towards yourself when you're struggling, rather than harsh and critical. It's choosing gentleness over judgment, support over condemnation. It's talking to yourself the way you'd talk to someone you care about, not the way you talk to someone you're trying to punish. Think about what you say to yourself when you replay an embarrassing moment. The words that run through your mind. I'm so stupid. I'm so awkward. Why am I like this? I always do this. I'm terrible at this. Everyone probably thinks I'm an idiot. Those aren't neutral observations, those are attacks. They're harsh, absolute, unforgiving, and they hurt. Not just emotionally, but neurologically. Your brain responds to self-criticism the way it responds to external threat. It activates stress responses. It releases cortisol. It puts you into a defensive, contracted state. But imagine, just for a moment, what it would sound like if you spoke to yourself differently. If instead of, I'm so stupid, you said, I made a mistake, and that's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. If instead of, I'm so awkward, you said, that interaction was uncomfortable, but I was doing my best. If instead of, why am I like this, you said, I'm learning, I'm human, I'm allowed to be imperfect. It probably feels strange even to imagine saying those things. Maybe it feels dishonest, like you're making excuses. Maybe it feels weak, like you're not holding yourself accountable. But self-kindness isn't about excuses or weakness. It's about accuracy. Because the harsh things you say to yourself aren't more true than the kind things. They're just harsher. And harshness doesn't lead to growth, it leads to shame. And shame, as we've already seen, doesn't motivate change. It just makes you want to hide. Self-kindness, on the other hand, creates safety. When you're kind to yourself, when you meet your mistakes with understanding rather than condemnation, you create an environment where learning is possible, where you can look at what happened, acknowledge what went wrong, and think about how to approach it differently next time, all without the crushing weight of self-hatred making it impossible to think clearly. The second component of self-compassion is common humanity. It's the recognition that suffering, struggle, and imperfection are part of the shared human experience, that you're not alone in making mistakes, that everyone, every single person, has moments they wish they could take back, moments they replay, moments that make them cringe. You're not uniquely flawed. You're not the only one who gets it wrong sometimes. You're just human, and this is what being human looks like. This is so important because one of the most painful parts of embarrassment is the isolation. The feeling that you're the only one who's this awkward, this incompetent, this unable to navigate social situations without making a fool of yourself. But that feeling is an illusion. It's the spotlight effect and the imaginary audience and the negativity bias all working together to convince you that you're uniquely terrible. But you're not. You're just having a universal human experience and feeling like it's yours, alone. Common humanity reminds you that everyone stumbles. Everyone says things that come out wrong. Everyone has moments where they feel exposed, judged, inadequate. And recognizing that doesn't diminish your pain. It doesn't make the embarrassment less real. But it does make it less isolating. It connects you to something larger than your individual suffering. It reminds you that this is part of what it means to be alive and vulnerable, and trying to connect with other people. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And when you hold that perspective, when you remember that you're not alone in this, something softens. The embarrassment is still there, maybe, but it's not wrapped in the added layer of shame that says, there's something wrong with me specifically. It's just, this is hard. This is part of being human. I'm not the first person to go through this, and I won't be the last. The third component is mindfulness. And in the context of self-compassion, mindfulness means holding your painful emotions in balanced awareness, not suppressing them, not exaggerating them, just observing them as they are. It's the ability to say, I'm feeling embarrassed right now, without adding, and I'll feel this way forever, or, and this means I'm terrible. It's staying with what's actually happening in the present moment, without getting swept away by the story your mind wants to tell about it. This is where the practice of acceptance that we talked about earlier comes in. Mindfulness, in this sense, is about being present with your discomfort, without needing to fix it or fight it or make it mean something catastrophic. It's noticing the flush of heat when the memory surfaces, noticing the tightness in your chest, noticing the thought, I can't believe I did that. And then, instead of grabbing onto that thought and spiraling into all the reasons why you're inadequate, you just let it be. You observe it, you acknowledge it, and you stay grounded in the present moment where you're safe, where the embarrassing event is in the past, where you're okay even though you're uncomfortable. These three elements, self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, they work together, they support each other, and when you practice them, even imperfectly, even in small moments, they start to change your relationship with your own suffering. They create a different internal environment, one where mistakes aren't catastrophes, where embarrassment isn't evidence of unworthiness, where you can be imperfect and still be okay. But here's the thing, self-compassion is hard, especially if you've spent years being hard on yourself, especially if harsh self-criticism feels like the only thing keeping you in line, the only thing motivating you to do better. There's often a fear that if you're kind to yourself, if you let yourself off the hook, you'll become complacent, you'll stop trying, you'll just keep making the same mistakes over and over because there are no consequences. But research shows the opposite is true. People who are self-compassionate are actually more motivated to improve, not less. Because they're not paralyzed by shame. They're not spending all their energy defending against the feeling of being fundamentally flawed. They can look at their mistakes clearly, without the distortion of self-hatred, and make genuine changes. They can learn and grow because they're not stuck in the cycle of beating themselves up. And self-compassion doesn't mean you don't have standards. It doesn't mean you accept bad behavior or stop trying to be better. It just means you separate your worth from your performance. You recognize that you can make a mistake and still be a good person. That you can have an awkward moment and still be lovable. That you can fail at something and still deserve kindness, especially from yourself. So what does self-compassion look like in practice? When you're lying in the dark, replaying an embarrassing moment, it might start with just noticing how you're talking to yourself, catching the harsh words, the absolutes, the attacks, and then, gently, trying something different. not forcing positivity, not pretending everything's fine, just offering yourself the same understanding you'd offer to someone else. You might place a hand on your heart, a physical gesture of comfort. You might take a slow breath and whisper, "This is hard. This is really hard." You might say, "I'm not the only one who's ever felt this way." You might remind yourself, "I was doing the best I could in that moment. I didn't know then what I know now." It might feel awkward at first. It might feel forced or silly or ineffective, but that's okay. You're learning a new language, the language of self-kindness, and like any new language, it takes time to feel natural. It takes practice. But every time you choose it, every time you soften toward yourself instead of hardening, you're creating new pathways, new patterns, new possibilities. And here's something important. Self-compassion doesn't require you to believe you're perfect or that you did nothing wrong. You can acknowledge that you wish you'd handled something differently and still be kind to yourself about it. You can say, "Yes, that was awkward. Yes, I wish I'd said something else. And also, I'm human, and humans are awkward sometimes, and that's okay." Both things can be true at once, the mistake and the worthiness, the regret and the compassion. This is what it means to hold an embarrassing memory with tenderness. Not to erase it, not to pretend it didn't happen, but to touch it gently, to say, "Yes, this is part of my story. This is something I went through, and I can hold it without letting it define me. I can acknowledge it without letting it destroy me." There's a practice, a quiet mantra that some people find helpful. It goes like this: "I made a mistake, and yet I'm still worthy. I had an awkward moment, and yet I'm still deserving of love. I didn't get it right, and yet I'm still enough." The "and yet" is powerful. It creates space for both truths, the imperfection and the inherent worth. It doesn't deny one to claim the other. It holds both. Because the truth is, you will never be perfect in social situations. You'll never reach a point where you never say the wrong thing, never misread a cue, never have an awkward moment. That's not a realistic goal. That's not even a human goal. Humans are messy. Interactions are complex. Communication is imperfect. And expecting yourself to navigate all of that flawlessly all the time is setting yourself up for a lifetime of disappointment and shame. But when you release the need to be flawless, when you accept that awkwardness is part of the deal, something remarkable happens. The embarrassing moments lose their power. They're no longer evidence of failure. They're just moments, just part of the texture of a life lived in connection with others, and you can have them without them having you. This is the difference between learning from mistakes and punishing yourself for them. Learning looks like, "That didn't go well. What can I take from this? How might I approach it differently next time?" It's reflective, it's curious, it's forward-looking, it's in service of growth. Punishment looks like, "I'm terrible. I always mess things up. I'll never get this right." It's repetitive, it's harsh, it's backward-looking, it's in service of nothing except suffering. And when you've been punishing yourself for a long time, when that's been your default response to mistakes, it can be hard to see the difference. It can feel like punishment is just what you deserve, like anything else would be letting yourself off too easy. But punishment doesn't teach, it doesn't heal, it doesn't lead anywhere except back to more punishment. Self-compassion, on the other hand, creates the conditions for actual change, for genuine learning, for the kind of growth that comes not from fear of being inadequate, but from a desire to align your actions with your values, to show up as the kind of person you want to be, Not because you're terrified of being anything else, but because you care. Because it matters to you. Because you're choosing it. And maybe that's the deepest invitation of self-compassion. The invitation to choose kindness over cruelty, to choose understanding over judgment, to choose to see yourself as someone who's learning and growing and doing their best, rather than someone who's fundamentally broken and needs to be fixed. Because you're not broken. You've never been broken. You're just a person navigating the impossible complexity of being alive and being seen. And some days you do it gracefully. Some days you stumble. Some days you fall flat on your face. And all of those days, all of those moments, they're part of the same journey, the same story, the same human life unfolding in all its imperfect beauty. So tonight, as you lie here, as the memory replays, as the embarrassment washes over you, what if you tried something different? What if instead of fighting it or feeding it, instead of suppressing it or spiraling into it, you just held it the way you'd hold something fragile, something tender, something that deserves care? What if you said, "This is hard, I'm struggling right now, and that's okay, I'm allowed to struggle"? What if you remembered, "I'm not alone in this, other people have felt this way, other people have had moments like this"? What if you noticed, "This is what embarrassment feels like, this is the sensation in my body right now, and I can be with it without being consumed by it"? What if you whispered to yourself, in the quiet of the dark, "I'm doing the best I can, I've always been doing the best I can, and that's enough, I'm enough. Even with all my awkward moments, even with all my mistakes, even with all the things I wish I could take back, I'm still worthy, I'm still deserving, I'm still okay." It might not feel true yet. It might feel like you're lying to yourself, but say it anyway, because sometimes belief follows practice. Sometimes you have to act as if before you can feel as if. And every time you choose self-compassion, even when it feels forced, even when you don't fully believe it, you're planting a seed. You're creating the possibility for something different to grow. And slowly, with time and practice and patience, that seed will grow. The voice of self-compassion will get stronger. The voice of self-criticism will get quieter, and the embarrassing moments, while they might still surface, while they might still sting, won't devastate you the way they once did. Because you'll meet them differently, with kindness, with understanding, with the knowledge that you're human and humans stumble, and that's not a tragedy, it's just the truth. So let yourself rest now. Let yourself be held by the kindness you're learning to offer yourself. You don't have to fix anything tonight. You don't have to resolve the memory or make it disappear or figure out how to never feel this way again. You just have to be here. Just have to breathe. Just have to know that you're doing the best you can. And that's all you've ever needed to do. That's all any of us can do. And it's enough. You're enough. You've always been enough. Even now, especially now. So here you are. You've travelled through the landscape of these memories, these moments that visit you in the dark. And maybe you understand them a little better now. Not just why they come, but what they're trying to tell you. That you care, that you feel, that you're wired for connection in a world that doesn't always make connection easy. And that's not something to fix. That's something to hold gently. You don't have to resolve anything tonight. You don't have to make the memories disappear or decide never to think about them again. You can just be here, breathing, knowing that you're human, that you're part of something larger, that Every person who's ever lived has had moments they wish they could take back. You're not alone in this. You never were. The embarrassing moments, the ones that replay, they're just fragments of a much bigger story. A story that's still being written. And you get to write it with kindness now, with patience, with the understanding that you've always been enough, even in your most awkward moments, even in your stumbling, even in your learning. So let the memory rest now. Let it float away like a leaf on water, drifting downstream, getting smaller, softer, until it's just part of the current. Let yourself rest too. You're safe here. You're held. You can sleep now. You're allowed.